Under a merciless frontier sun, a rebellious noblewoman named Lydia Ashcroft is dragged across the American desert to crush her defiance. When bandits slaughter her escort, she faces certain death until a silent Apache warrior emerges from the wasteland. In the brutal desert, they must choose, survive together or die alone. Stay with this gripping story until the end. Hit like and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The wagon jolted hard enough to crack Lydia's teeth together. She grabbed the wooden bench beneath her, fingers white-knuckled, and watched dust plume through the canvas flaps. Everything smelled like heat and horse sweat and her own fear, though she'd die before admitting that last part. "Sit still, Miss Ashcroft." Her aunt's voice cut through the rattling. Margaret Holcomb sat across from her, spine rigid as iron, hands folded over her black traveling dress. "You're making it worse."
"I'm not doing anything," Lydia shot back. "The road's doing it." "Then endure it quietly." Lydia bit her tongue. 3 weeks of this. 3 weeks since her father had looked at her across his mahogany desk in Philadelphia and said, "You've embarrassed this family for the last time." 3 weeks since he'd announced she was being sent west to marry some cattle baron she'd never met, a man twice her age who needed a wife young enough to bear him sons and decorative enough to prove his wealth. She'd thrown a crystal paperweight at the wall. It had shattered beautifully. Now here she was, being hauled across a desert that looked like the surface of hell, surrounded by rocks the color of dried blood and sky so blue it hurt. 4 armed men rode alongside the wagon, hired guns her father had paid to make sure she arrived at her destination. One way or another. "You could have just let me go," Lydia said quietly. "I would have disappeared. You'd never have heard from me again." Margaret's mouth thinned. "And let you destroy yourself? Live in poverty? Or worse?" She shook her head. "Your father is giving you a future, Lydia. A good one. Mr. Brennan owns half of Arizona territory. You'll want for nothing. Except a choice." "Choice," Margaret said the word like it tasted bitter. "You're 22 years old. You've had every advantage, every comfort. And you've spent your life reading radical newspapers, arguing with your father's business partners, and humiliating yourself at suffrage meetings. It's time to grow up." Lydia looked out through the canvas again. The landscape had changed in the past hour. Less flat desert, more rocky outcroppings, and twisted juniper trees. The mountains in the distance looked like broken teeth. "Miss Holcomb?" One of the hired men appeared at the wagon's opening, a lean, weathered man named Cutler who wore his gun like a third arm. "We're stopping for water, 15 minutes. "Thank you, Mr. Cutler." The wagon lurched to a halt. Lydia climbed out before her aunt could protest, her legs shaky after hours of sitting. The other 3 men were already at the horses, offering water from canteens. The animals drank greedily, foam specking their bits. It was brutally hot. Lydia pulled off her traveling gloves and unbuttoned the high collar of her dress, ignoring Margaret's disapproving stare. Let the old woman clutch her pearls. Out here, propriety felt as useful as lace in a knife fight. "Don't wander," Cutler said. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes scanned the ridgeline above them, restless and sharp. "I'm not a child." "Didn't say you were." His hand rested on his revolver. "But this isn't Philadelphia, Miss Ashcroft. Things happen fast out here." She wanted to snap at him, but something in his voice stopped her. He wasn't being condescending. He was being careful, maybe even afraid. She took a few steps away from the wagon, stretching her back, and that's when she heard it, a sound like wind through a canyon, except there was no wind. The air had gone completely still. One of the other men heard it too. "Cutler!" The first shot cracked across the desert like a whip. Everything exploded. Men poured out from behind the rocks. 6, 8, maybe more. All of them shouting, guns firing in a chaos of smoke and noise that Lydia's mind couldn't process fast enough. Cutler shoved her hard toward the wagon, and she fell, hands scraping dirt, and then he was shooting back, his face grim and focused. "Get in the wagon!" Margaret screamed. Lydia scrambled up, but her skirts tangled around her legs, and she went down again, tasting dust and copper. A horse screamed, an awful sound, animal and wrong. One of the hired men dropped to his knees, clutching his chest, his mouth open in surprise. "Move!" Cutler hauled her up by her arm, half dragging her toward the wagon. Another shot rang out, and he jerked, stumbled. Blood bloomed across his shoulder, but he didn't stop, just shoved her toward Margaret's reaching hands. Then something hit him in the back and he went down hard. Lydia screamed. She didn't mean to. It just tore out of her, raw and useless. Margaret grabbed her wrist and yanked her into the wagon, and for a moment Lydia thought they might actually make it, might actually survive this. A man appeared at the canvas opening. He was grinning. His teeth were brown. "Well now," he said, "ain't this a pretty picture?" Margaret threw herself in front of Lydia. "Take the wagon. Take everything. Just let us—" He shot her, just like that. No hesitation, no warning. The sound was enormous in the enclosed space, and Margaret fell backward into Lydia's arms, her weight sudden and terrible. "Aunt Margaret!" Lydia's hands came away red, so much red. Margaret's eyes were wide and shocked, and then they weren't looking at anything at all. "Get her out!" The man stepped into the wagon, still grinning. Behind him, the sounds of gunfire had stopped. Everything had stopped except Lydia's heart, which was trying to beat its way out of her chest. Rough hands grabbed her. She fought, clawed and kicked and bit. But there were too many of them. They dragged her out into the blinding sunlight where the bodies of Cutler and the other men lay in spreading pools. The horses were dead too, all except one that stood trembling, reins hanging loose. This the one Brennan's supposed to marry? One of the bandits, a tall man with a scar splitting his eyebrow, walked around her like she was livestock. "She'll fetch a price." Brennan's expecting her," another said. "He'll pay to get her back. Or we sell her to the Comancheros, either way." The scarred man grabbed Lydia's face, forcing her to look at him. His breath smelled like rot-gut whiskey. "You hearing this, princess? You just became a business investment." She spat in his face. He hit her hard enough that she saw stars. When her vision cleared, she was on the ground again, tasting blood. The man wiped his face with his sleeve, not grinning anymore. "Put her on the horse, and if she tries that again, break something that'll heal crooked." They tied her hands behind her back with rawhide that bit into her wrists. One of them, a young one, barely older than she was, lifted her onto the surviving horse and tied her ankles together under its belly. She sat there, numb and shaking, while they looted the wagon and stripped the dead men of anything valuable. "What about the old woman?" someone asked. "Leave her. Buzzards got to eat too." They rode north into the maze of canyons where the rock formations rose like cathedral walls and the shadows ran deep and cool. Lydia lost track of time. The sun climbed higher and her head pounded where the scarred man had hit her. Sweat stung her eyes and her mouth was so dry, her tongue felt like leather. No one spoke much. The bandits seemed to know where they were going, following some invisible trail through the broken landscape. Once they passed what looked like an old Apache camp, the stones of a fire ring still visible in a shallow cave. One of the men made a sign against evil. "I hate this country," he muttered. "It's dead country now," the scarred man said. "Army cleaned it out. Ain't nothing left but ghosts." They stopped as the sun started to sink, making camp in a box canyon with high walls on 3 sides. Someone built a fire. The smell of coffee and salt pork made Lydia's stomach clench with hunger she couldn't afford to feel. "Water her," the scarred man ordered. "Don't need her dying before we make the exchange." The young bandit, the one who'd lifted her onto the horse, brought her a canteen. He had to hold it to her lips since her hands were still bound. Lydia drank greedily, water spilling down her chin, and hated how grateful she felt. "You got a name?" she asked when he pulled the canteen away. He glanced toward the others, nervous. "Billy." "Billy what?" "Just Billy." "Well, just Billy, you know this is kidnapping and murder. They'll hang you for it." "They'll have to catch us first." But he didn't sound convinced. He looked maybe 17. "You shouldn't have spit on Rake. He ain't a man you want angry at you." "I'll keep that in mind," Lydia said flatly. Billy left her alone after that. She sat with her back against a rock, watching the fire and the men around it. They were passing a bottle, voices getting louder. 2 of them started arguing about something, how to split the money maybe, or which direction to ride tomorrow. It escalated quickly. One shoved the other, and suddenly they were on their feet, hands on their guns. "Enough!" Rake's voice cracked like a whip. "We stay together until the exchange. Then you can kill each other if you want, but not before." The men subsided, sullen. Rake looked at Lydia across the fire, and something in his expression made her skin crawl.
pretty thing like you," he said. "Shame to just hand you over for money." "Brennan's paying good," one of the others said quickly. "And he's connected. We don't want that kind of trouble." "Maybe." Rake took a pull from the bottle. "But we got 3 days until the meet. A lot can happen in 3 days." Lydia forced herself to hold his stare. "You touch me and Brennan won't pay you anything. Damaged goods aren't worth as much." Several of the men laughed. Rake's face darkened. "Listen to her," he said. "Got a mouth on her. That what got you sent out here, princess? Couldn't learn to shut up and smile?" "Among other things." "Well," he stood up, still holding the bottle. "I think I'll teach you some manners." He started toward her, and Lydia's heart kicked into her throat. This was it. No one was going to stop him. Billy looked away, ashamed but not brave enough to intervene. The other men just watched, some of them grinning. Rake was 3 steps away when the arrow took him through the throat. He made a wet choking sound and dropped the bottle. It shattered on the rocks. He clutched at the arrow shaft jutting from his neck, blood pouring between his fingers, and then he fell forward onto his face and didn't move again. For a single crystalline second, no one moved, no one breathed. Then all hell broke loose. The bandits grabbed for their guns, but more arrows came out of the darkness. Silent, lethal, finding throats and chests with surgical precision. One man got his revolver up and fired blindly into the night, the muzzle flash blinding. Someone screamed. Billy ran for the horses, but something hit him and he went down hard. Lydia pressed herself against the rock, trying to make herself small. The firelight threw wild shadows, and she couldn't tell what was happening anymore. Just shapes moving in the darkness, the sounds of men dying, and underneath it all, a silence that was somehow worse than the noise. Then it was over. The fire crackled. Bodies lay scattered around it like broken dolls. And standing at the edge of the light was a man. He was tall, taller than any of the bandits had been, and dressed in buckskin and dark cloth that blended with the shadows. His face was hard, all sharp angles and flat planes, and his hair was long and black. He held a bow in one hand, arrow nocked, but not drawn. His eyes found Lydia and locked there. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Her mind kept trying to process what she was seeing and failing. This wasn't possible. One man couldn't have killed 7 others without taking a scratch. One man couldn't move that silently, shoot that accurately, disappear and reappear like smoke. He walked toward her, stepping over Rake's body without looking down. Lydia tried to push herself further into the rock, but there was nowhere to go. When he stopped in front of her, she could see the scars on his hands, the silver armbands at his wrists, the absolute stillness in his face. "Please," she heard herself say. "Please don't." He crouched down and pulled a knife from his belt. Lydia's breath stopped. This was it. He was going to kill her too, and she'd die in this nameless canyon, and no one would ever know what happened to her. The knife flashed. The rawhide around her wrists parted. Lydia stared at him. He was already cutting through the bindings at her ankles, his movements quick and efficient. When he finished, he stood up and stepped back, watching her. "You're letting me go?" He didn't answer, didn't even acknowledge that she'd spoken. He just turned and walked back toward the darkness beyond the firelight. "Wait!" Lydia struggled to her feet, her legs cramping from hours of being tied. "Wait, you can't just... Where am I supposed to go?" He stopped, turned back. For the first time, she saw his face clearly in the firelight. The hard line of his mouth, the diagonal scar across his left cheekbone, the eyes that showed nothing at all. "Home," he said. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "I don't have a home." The words came out before she could stop them. "I have a prison I'm being sent to, and a house I was thrown out of, and that's it." He studied her for a long moment. Then he looked past her, toward the dead bandits, and something flickered across his face. Not quite emotion, but the memory of it. "You should go anyway," he said. "Where? How?" Lydia gestured at the darkness around them. "I don't know this country. I'll die out here alone." "Maybe." He turned away again. "But that's not my problem." "Please." She hated the desperation in her voice, but she couldn't stop it. "At least tell me which direction to walk. Give me water, something." "East," he said without looking back. 3 days if you don't stop. Follow the sunrise." 3 days to what?"
but he was already gone, melting into the shadows like he'd never been there at all. Lydia stood alone in the firelight, surrounded by corpses, and felt the enormity of the desert pressing in from all sides. She looked at the dead men, at the horses that had bolted, at the canyon walls rising black against the stars. Then she looked at the dying fire and made a decision. She gathered what she could, a canteen from one of the bodies, a knife, a coat that wasn't too bloody. She rolled it all into a bundle and tied it with leather cord. Then she kicked dirt over the fire until only embers remained and started walking. East, toward the sunrise. 3 days. She made it maybe an hour before she heard the sound behind her, a footfall so quiet she almost missed it. She spun around, the knife in her hand, though she had no idea how to use it. He was there, 10 feet back, a darker shadow in the darkness. "You're following me," Lydia said. He didn't deny it, didn't confirm it either. "Why?" "I thought it wasn't your problem." "It's not." But he didn't leave. They stared at each other across the space between them. Lydia's hands were shaking, and she couldn't tell if it was fear or exhaustion or the shock finally catching up with her. "Are you going to kill me?" "No." "Are you going to help me?" A pause. Then, "No." "Then what do you want?" "To make sure you go the right direction." He gestured into the darkness. "You're walking north. East is that way." Lydia looked where he was pointing and felt her face burn. She'd been walking in a complete circle, probably would have ended up right back at the canyon by morning. "Fine," she said. "Show me east, then leave." He studied her for another moment, and she could feel him weighing something, measuring her worth maybe, or calculating how much trouble she'd be. Then he simply started walking, not east, north, deeper into the canyons. "That's not east," Lydia called after him. "No," he agreed. "But there's water that way. You'll need it." "I thought you weren't helping me." "I'm not." He didn't slow down. "I'm going that way anyway. Follow if you want." Lydia looked back the way she'd come, then at the path he was taking, then at the canteen in her hand, already half empty. She cursed under her breath and followed him into the dark. He moved through the darkness like he was part of it, never stumbling, never hesitating. Lydia struggled to keep up, her boots sliding on loose rock, her breath coming hard. The coat she'd taken hung awkwardly over one arm, and the canteen kept banging against her hip. Every few minutes she'd lose sight of him completely, and panic would spike through her chest. Then she'd catch a glimpse of movement ahead and force her legs to keep going. They walked for what felt like hours. The canyon walls rose higher on either side, blocking out the stars, and the air grew cooler. Lydia's feet hurt. Her head hurt. Everything hurt, and underneath the pain was a numbness she didn't trust, the kind that meant her mind was trying to protect her from what she'd seen, what she'd lost. Margaret's face kept flashing through her thoughts, the surprise in her eyes, the weight of her body falling backward. "Stop," Lydia said. Her voice came out thin and shaky. "I need to stop." He didn't turn around, didn't slow. "Not here." "I don't care. I can't." Her foot caught on something and she went down hard, hands scraping rock. The canteen clattered away into the darkness. "Damn it!" That made him stop. He looked back at her, his face unreadable in the shadows, then walked over and picked up the canteen. He held it out to her without comment. Lydia took it, her hands shaking. She wanted to say thank you, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just sat there on the ground, trying not to cry, trying not to think about how thoroughly her life had collapsed in the span of a single day. "There's a shelter ahead," he said. "Another mile." "I don't think I can walk another mile." "Then you'll die here." She looked up at him sharply. His face was still expressionless, but something in his tone suggested he wasn't being cruel, just stating a fact. "Out here, weakness killed you. Hesitation killed you. Stopping in the wrong place killed you." "Give me a minute," she said. He didn't argue, just moved off to the side and crouched down on his heels, waiting. Lydia forced herself to breathe slowly, to let her heartbeat settle. Her dress was ruined, torn and filthy and completely impractical. Her hair had come loose from its pins and hung in tangles around her face. She probably looked like something that had crawled out of a grave. She stood up, her legs wobbled but held. "All right," she said. "Let's go." The shelter turned out to be a shallow overhang in the canyon wall.
Not quite a cave, but deep enough to provide protection from the wind and whatever else might be out there. He stopped at the entrance and gestured for her to wait, then disappeared inside. She heard the scrape of a match, and then dim light flickered across stone walls. When she ducked inside, she found him crouched by a small fire he'd built from dead juniper branches. The smoke rose straight up and out through a crack in the rock overhead. Smart. No one would see it. "Sit, Bahan," he said. Lydia sat. The warmth from the fire felt incredible, and she realized she was shaking with cold. The desert was an oven during the day, but at night it turned into something else entirely. He pulled something from a leather pouch at his belt, dried meat of some kind, and held it out. She took it automatically, too tired to question. It was tough and salty, and tasted like smoke. She chewed slowly, forcing herself to swallow, even though her stomach wanted to reject it. "What's your name?" she asked after a while. He was staring into the fire, his face half in shadow. "Doesn't matter. It matters to me. You saved my life. I should know what to call you." A long silence, then, "Kyle." "Just Kyle." "Just Kyle." "Well, just Kyle, I'm Lydia." She waited for some acknowledgement, but he didn't move, didn't even blink. "You're Apache." Not a question. He still didn't respond. The bandits said the army cleaned this area out, that there was nothing left but ghosts. She watched his face carefully. "But you're here." "I'm here," he agreed flatly. "Why? Why didn't you leave with the others when they were forced out?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his eyes made her wish she hadn't asked. "Who says I was forced? Weren't you? Everyone was forced, one way or another." He turned back to the fire. "You should sleep. Long walk tomorrow." "To where?" "Fort Redstone, 3 days east, like I said. You can get help there." "And then what?" "They'll just send me to Brennan anyway. That's what I was being transported for. To marry him." "That's not my problem." "You keep saying that." Lydia pulled the coat tighter around her shoulders. "But you're still here." "Not for long." She wanted to push harder, to crack through whatever wall he'd built around himself, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a current. Her eyes kept trying to close. The fire was warm and the stone beneath her was almost comfortable, and she hadn't slept in… how long? A day? 2? "Lydia." His voice cut through the fog in her head. "Don't sleep yet. Drink first." He was holding out the canteen. She took it and drank, the water sharp and cold. When she tried to hand it back, he shook his head. "Keep it and stay on this side of the fire." "Why?" "Snakes come out at night. They're drawn to warmth." That woke her up. She pulled her feet in close and scanned the ground around her, suddenly seeing threats in every shadow. Cale watched her with something that might have been amusement. "Just stay still," he said. "They won't bother you if you don't bother them." "That's easy for you to say." "Yes," he agreed. "It is." She must have slept, because when she opened her eyes again, the fire had burned down to embers, and pale light was seeping into the canyon. Her neck ached, and her back felt like someone had beaten it with a club. Across the dead fire, Kyle sat exactly where he'd been before, watching the entrance. She couldn't tell if he'd slept at all. "We're leaving," he said when he saw her eyes open. Lydia pushed herself upright, wincing. Every muscle in her body screamed protest. "Can I have a minute to…" "No." He was already gathering his things, bow, quiver, a small pack she hadn't noticed before. "Soldiers patrol these canyons. We need to be gone before they come through." "Soldiers? You mean army soldiers?" He didn't answer, just ducked out of the shelter. Lydia scrambled after him, still trying to wake up properly. The morning air was cold and sharp, and the sky above the canyon rim was turning gold. They walked in silence for the first hour. Lydia's stomach cramped with hunger, but she didn't complain. Kyle set a brutal pace, moving fast over terrain that seemed impossible. Loose scree that slid underfoot, narrow ledges where one wrong step would send you tumbling down into nothing. He never looked back to see if she was keeping up. She kept up anyway. Partly out of stubbornness, partly out of fear of being left behind. The sun climbed higher and the temperature rose with it, and soon she was sweating through her ruined dress. She took off the coat and tied it around her waist, wishing desperately for water, even though she'd already drunk half the canteen. How much further? She asked when they stopped briefly in the shade of a rock formation. Depends how fast you walk. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. He was scanning the canyon behind them, his body tense. Keep moving. Wait, do you see something? Not yet. That's why we're moving. They climbed out of the canyon system by midday, emerging onto a high plateau covered in sparse grass and scattered juniper. The view went on forever, miles of broken country stretching in every direction, mountains purple in the distance. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, this land that didn't care whether you lived or died. Kael stopped at the edge of a dry wash and crouched down, studying something in the dirt. Lydia moved closer and saw what he was looking at. Hoof prints, lots of them, cutting across the wash in a line. How old? She asked. He glanced at her, surprised she'd asked. Few hours, moving fast. The soldiers you mentioned? Maybe. Or someone else. He stood up. Either way, we need to change direction. But you said east. East will get you killed if we keep following this trail. He pointed northwest toward a range of red cliffs. We go that way. Circle around, come at the fort from the north. That'll take longer. Yes. What if I don't want to take longer? What if I want to get out of this hell as fast as possible? He looked at her steadily. Then go east. See what happens. Lydia stared at the hoof prints, at the empty country beyond, and felt anger surge up hot in her chest. You know what? I'm tired of you acting like I'm some kind of burden you're stuck with. You didn't have to help me. You could have left me tied up in that canyon, and I would have figured something out. You would have died. Maybe. But that would have been my choice, my risk. Instead, you cut me loose, and now you're stuck dragging me around like luggage you can't get rid of. She was breathing hard, fists clenched. So either commit to helping me or leave me alone, but stop this halfway thing where you pretend you don't care, but you're still here. Kael's face didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something sharp and old and dangerous. You want me to leave you alone? I want you to decide what you're doing. Fine. I'm leaving. He turned and started walking northwest toward the cliffs. Lydia stood there, watching him go, and panic fluttered in her chest. She looked at the empty plateau, at the hoof prints in the dirt, at the canteen in her hand that was more than half empty now. Then she looked at Kael's retreating figure. Wait! She ran after him, stumbling over the rough ground. Wait, I didn't mean... He stopped but didn't turn around. I'm sorry, she said when she caught up. That was stupid. I'm just tired and scared and I took it out on you. I know. Then why are you leaving? I'm not. He started walking again. I'm going northwest. You're following me. There's a difference. What difference? I'm not responsible for you. You choose to follow. That's on you. I don't owe you anything. Except you keep helping me. I keep walking in a direction. If you walk in the same direction, that's your business. It was such obvious bullshit that Lydia almost laughed. But there was something underneath it. Some rule he'd made for himself. Some line he wouldn't cross. She didn't understand it, but she recognized the shape of it. Okay, she said. I'll walk in the same direction you're walking. Good. They crossed the plateau in silence after that, and as the hours passed, Lydia found her anger draining away, replaced by a strange kind of focus. Out here, everything was immediate, the heat, the thirst, the ache in her legs. There was no room for anything else. No room for grief or fear or the weight of her old life. Just the next step, and the one after that. They reached the cliffs by late afternoon, and Kael led them into a narrow defile that cut through the rock like a wound. The walls rose 50 feet on either side, so close in places that Lydia could touch both at once. The air was cooler here, trapped between the stones, and their footsteps echoed strangely. This feels like a trap, Lydia said quietly. It is. Kael was moving faster now, almost jogging. But it's the only way through, and we need to be past it before dark. Why? What happens at dark? Things you don't want to meet. They were halfway through when Lydia heard it, a sound like rattling stones coming from somewhere behind them. She looked back but saw only shadows and the narrow slice of sky overhead. Don't stop, Kael said. He'd drawn his knife. What is that? Keep moving. The sound came again, closer now, not stones. Something alive, something moving through the defile behind them. Lydia's heart kicked into high gear and she wanted to run, but Kyle grabbed her arm. "Slow," he said. "Don't run. That's what it wants." "What is it?" "Cougar, probably. Maybe a bear." "Maybe a bear?" Her voice came out higher than she intended. "You don't know?" "Does it matter?" He pulled her forward, faster but not running, his eyes on the shadows behind them. "Just move." They burst out of the defile into open air, and Cale immediately pulled her sideways into the cover of a boulder field. He pressed her down into a crouch and put a finger to his lips. Lydia held her breath, listening. For a long moment, nothing. Then she heard it, the soft pad of something heavy moving across stone. It paused at the mouth of the defile, and in the fading light, she saw it. A mountain lion, lean and scarred, with eyes that reflected the sunset like copper coins. It looked right at them. Lydia's entire body went rigid. Kyle's hand tightened on her shoulder, a warning to stay absolutely still. The lion watched them for what felt like an eternity. Then it turned and padded away, disappearing into the rocks like smoke. Lydia didn't move until Kyle's hand relaxed. Then she let out a shaking breath. "It saw us." "Yes." "Why didn't it attack?" "Because we're not worth the effort. Too many easier meals out here." He stood up, scanning the area. "But we're not staying here. Come on." They made camp that night in a ring of boulders that provided decent cover on 3 sides. Kyle didn't build a fire and they ate in darkness, more dried meat and some kind of hard bread he produced from his pack. Lydia chewed mechanically, too tired to care what it tasted like. "Where did you learn to survive like this?" she asked into the darkness. For a while she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "You learn or you die. That's the only lesson that matters. Your people taught you." "Some. The rest I taught myself." "Where are they now, your people?" "Gone." His voice was flat, empty. "Dead, scattered on reservations. Pick one." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Sorry doesn't bring them back." Lydia pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping the coat tighter. The night air was cold and the stars overhead were impossibly bright. "Why did you stay? In this area, I mean. If everyone else left." "I didn't say everyone left. I said they were gone. There's a difference." "What difference?" "Leaving is a choice. Being driven out isn't." He shifted in the darkness. "And I stay because this is my land. Was my land. Still is, far as I'm concerned. The fact that someone drew a line on a map and called it theirs doesn't change what it actually is. The government can go to hell." There was real heat in his voice for the first time, and Lydia realized she'd touched something raw. She wanted to ask more, but she knew better. Instead, she just said, "I understand. Not the same way, but I understand." "Do you?" "They drew lines around my life, too. Told me who I was supposed to be, what I was supposed to want. When I tried to step outside those lines, they called it rebellion, disobedience. My father said I was destroying the family name." She laughed bitterly. "So they shipped me out here to marry a man who'd keep me inside the lines they drew. And now? Now those lines don't exist anymore. Everyone who was enforcing them is dead, and I'm sitting in the desert with a stranger who saved my life for reasons he won't explain." She looked in his direction, though she couldn't see his face. "So I guess I'm free, for whatever that's worth." "It's worth everything," Kale said quietly. "Or nothing. Depends what you do with it." They didn't talk much after that. Lydia lay down on the hard ground and used the coat as a pillow, staring up at the stars until her eyes closed. She dreamed of Margaret's face, of Cutler falling, of the bandit leader with an arrow through his throat. She woke gasping sometime before dawn, her heart racing. Cale was awake, sitting with his back against a boulder. Bad dreams? Something like that. She sat up, hugging her knees. Do they ever stop? The dreams? No, you just get used to them. That's not very comforting. Wasn't meant to be. They started walking before the sun came up, moving through the gray pre-dawn light. The country had changed again, less rock, more open desert, with creosote bushes and prickly pear dotting the landscape. In the distance, Lydia could see smoke rising in thin columns. "Is that the fort?" she asked. "No, too far west." Cale stopped, studying the smoke. "Could be travelers. Could be trouble. Should we avoid it?" "Depends. We're almost out of water." He looked at her. "How much you got left?" Lydia checked the canteen, maybe a quarter full. "Not much." "Then we need to find more, and that means taking risks." He started walking toward the smoke. "Stay close. And if I tell you to run, you run. Don't argue. Don't hesitate. Just run." "Where would I run to?" "Anywhere but here." They approached carefully, using the terrain for cover. As they got closer, Lydia could make out shapes: a wagon, a few horses, several people moving around. Not soldiers. Too disorganized. "Prospectors," Cale said quietly. "Maybe traders. Hard to tell from here. Should we go around? Too late? They've seen us." He straightened up, hands visible and away from his weapons. "Let me do the talking." They walked into the camp openly. There were 4 men, 3 white, 1 Mexican, and they all stopped what they were doing to stare. One of them, a heavy-set man with a gray beard, let his hand drift toward the rifle leaning against the wagon. "Easy," Cale said. "Just passing through. Need water if you can spare it." The bearded man looked from Cale to Lydia and back again. "You're Apache." "Part. Don't see many of your kind out here anymore. Thought the army rounded you all up." "They tried." Cale's voice was perfectly neutral. "About that water. What you gotta trade?" Cale pulled something from his pack, a small leather pouch. He opened it and showed the contents. Silver jewelry, Lydia realized. Beautifully made, old. The bearded man's eyes lit up. "Where'd you get that?" "Does it matter?" "Might. Could be stolen. Everything's stolen out here. You want it or not?" They haggled for a few minutes, the kind of back and forth that seemed almost ritualistic. Eventually, they settled on 2 pieces of jewelry for a full canteen of water and some cornmeal. The bearded man poured the water himself, watching Cale carefully the whole time. "You 2 traveling together?" he asked, nodding at Lydia. "No," Cale said. "Yes," Lydia said at the same time. The men laughed. The Mexican one said something in Spanish, and the others laughed harder. Lydia felt her face burn. "She's a runaway," the bearded man said. It wasn't a question. "Could be a reward for her." "Could be," Cale agreed. "But you'd have to catch her first, and you'd have to deal with whoever's looking for her. That seem worth it to you?" The man studied them both, then spat into the dirt. "Get gone. And if anyone asks, we didn't see nothing." They left quickly before the men could change their minds. Once they were out of sight of the camp, Lydia rounded on Cale. "Why did you give them those? They looked valuable." "They were." "Then why?" "Because we needed water, and they had it. That's how it works out here. Everything's a trade." "But those pieces, they looked old, special." "They were my mother's." He said it flatly, like he was talking about the weather. "She's dead. She doesn't need them." Lydia didn't know what to say to that. She walked in silence for a while, processing. He'd traded away something precious, something that must have meant something to him, like it was nothing, because the alternative was dying of thirst. "I'll pay you back," she said finally. "When we get to the fort, I'll find a way." "Don't." "But I said don't. It's done. Forget it." They walked until the sun was high overhead, and the heat was like a physical weight pressing down. Cale found a spot of shade under an overhang, and they stopped to rest. Lydia drank sparingly from the new canteen and tried not to think about how far they still had to go. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You will, anyway." "Why Stone Giant? The bandits, they mentioned someone called that. Was that you?" Cale didn't answer for a long time. Then, "It's a name people gave me after I stopped being what I was and became what they needed me to be." "Which was?" "Something to be afraid of." "Are you?" "Something to be afraid of." He looked at her directly. "Yes." She believed him, but sitting here in the shade, watching him check the arrows in his quiver with careful precision, he didn't seem frightening, just tired, worn down by something she couldn't see. "Those men you killed," she said.
The bandits. Did that bother you? No? Why not? Because they earned it. They killed your people, planned to sell you.
That kind of man, the world's better off without him. He strung his bow, testing the tension. I've killed a lot of men. Some of them deserved it. Some of them didn't. I don't lose sleep over any of them anymore. How many is a lot? More than you want to know. They sat in silence after that, and Lydia tried to reconcile the man beside her with what he was describing. A killer. Someone who'd taken enough lives that he'd stopped counting. But also someone who'd saved her, who'd traded away his mother's jewelry for water, who kept walking in a direction that happened to keep her alive. My father would hate you, she said suddenly. Cale glanced at her. I'm sure. He'd call you a savage, uncivilized. He'd say you were exactly the kind of threat that needed to be eliminated. Probably right. He's not, though. You're more civilized than most of the men I knew in Philadelphia. They were just better at hiding their violence behind money and manners. That's supposed to be a compliment? I don't know. Maybe. She picked at a thread on her ruined dress. I spent my whole life around men who smiled while they hurt people. You don't smile. That seems more honest. Honest doesn't mean good. No, but I'll take it over the alternative. The afternoon stretched on, brutal and bright. They crossed areas where the ground was cracked and broken, where nothing grew and the sun reflected off white alkali flats. Lydia's lips cracked and bled. Her feet blistered inside her boots. She stopped looking ahead and just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, matching Kael's pace even when every step felt impossible. When the sun finally started to sink, painting the sky orange and purple, they were in broken country again. Not quite canyon, but not quite open desert either. Cale found a defensible spot among some rocks and declared they'd stop for the night. Tomorrow, he said. We'll see the fort by midday. You'll be there by evening. And then? Then you're not my problem anymore. She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt something like disappointment. What will you do? After I'm gone? Same thing I always do. Survive. You could come with me. To the fort. Maybe they'd hang me. He said it simply. Or shoot me on sight. Depends who sees me first. For what? You haven't done anything wrong. I'm Apache. That's enough. He stretched out on the ground, using his pack as a pillow. Get some sleep. Long day tomorrow. Lydia lay down, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept turning over everything that had happened. The attack, the rescue, the past 2 days of walking. She thought about Margaret, about Cutler, about her father's face when he told her she was being sent away. All of it felt distant now, like it had happened to someone else. Kael? She said into the darkness. What? Thank you. For everything. A long pause, then, go to sleep, Lydia. She did eventually, and when she woke before dawn, ready to walk the final stretch to whatever came next, she found him already awake, staring east toward the horizon where the sun would rise. They were an hour into the morning walk when Lydia saw the dust cloud on the horizon. At first she thought it was a trick of the light, heat shimmer making the air dance, but Kael stopped dead and his whole body went rigid. Get down, he said. She dropped into a crouch behind a cluster of mesquite without asking why. Kael was already moving, low and fast, toward higher ground, where he could see better. Lydia watched him climb onto a flat boulder and shade his eyes against the sun, staring at the distant dust. When he came back down, his face was grim. Riders, maybe a dozen, coming from the southeast. Soldiers. Can't tell yet, but they're moving fast and they're headed this direction. He looked around, calculating. We need to get off the flat ground. Now. They ran. Not the careful, measured pace Kael had maintained for the past 2 days, but an actual sprint across broken terrain that had Lydia's lungs burning within minutes. He led them into a shallow arroyo where stunted willows grew along a mostly dry stream bed, their roots clinging to the damp sand. Stay here, Kael said. Don't move, don't make noise. If they pass by, wait until you can't hear them anymore. Then head northeast. You'll hit the fort by nightfall. What are you doing? Leading them away. He was already checking his bow, counting arrows. If they're hunting me, they'll follow. And if they're not, what if they're just travelers? Then I'll know soon enough. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, something almost like regret crossed his face. "You did good, Lydia. Better than I expected." "Don't." Her voice came out sharp. "Don't talk like you're saying goodbye." "I am saying goodbye." "No." She grabbed his arm. "You don't have to do this. We can hide together, wait for them to pass." "They won't pass. Not if they're looking for me." He pulled free gently. "And if they find us together, they'll kill you too. Or worse." "I don't care." "Yes, you do. You just don't want to admit it yet." He touched her face briefly, his calloused hand rough against her skin. "Go to the fort. Tell them what happened. They'll send you somewhere safe."
"I don't want safe. I want—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. What did she want? She didn't even know anymore. 3 days ago, she'd wanted to escape her father's control, to avoid the marriage, to have some say in her own life. Now those things seemed impossibly distant, like they'd happened to someone else entirely.
"You want to survive," Kyle said quietly. "That's enough. That's everything." He turned and climbed out of the arroyo before she could stop him. She watched him go. This man who'd saved her life without explanation, who'd kept her alive through 2 days of hell, who was now walking toward danger to give her a chance. The dust cloud was closer now, close enough that she could make out individual shapes within it. Riders. Definitely soldiers. She could see the uniform blue even at this distance. Kyle moved into the open, into a spot where he'd be visible. He stood there, waiting, and Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane. This was suicide. She should stay hidden like he'd told her to, but instead she found herself climbing out of the arroyo, her legs moving before her brain caught up. "Kyle!" He turned, saw her, and his expression went hard. "Get back!" The first shot cracked across the desert. Dirt exploded near Kyle's feet, and he dove sideways, rolling, coming up with his bow already drawn. He loosed an arrow, and one of the distant riders fell from his horse. Then chaos. The soldiers spread out, circling, firing as they came. Kyle moved like smoke, never staying in one place, using every rock and shrub for cover. His arrows flew with deadly precision. Another soldier down, then another. But there were too many of them, and they were closing fast. Lydia ran toward him without thinking. She had no weapon, no plan, just a desperate need to not let him die alone. She picked up a rock, stupid, useless, and threw it at the nearest rider. It bounced off his horse's flank, and the animal reared, buying Kyle a second to relocate. "What are you doing?" Kyle shouted at her. "I don't know." A bullet whined past Lydia's head, close enough that she felt the air move. Kale grabbed her and dragged her behind a boulder, his face furious. "Are you trying to get killed?" "Are you?" "That's different. It's not different at all." She was shaking, but she held his stare. "You said I have a choice. This is me choosing." He looked like he wanted to argue, but there was no time. The soldiers were dismounting, taking up positions, preparing for a sustained fight. One of them, an officer with gold braid on his shoulders, called out across the empty ground. "Kale Stone Giant, you're surrounded. Surrender, and the woman lives." Kale's jaw tightened. He said nothing. "We know who you are," the officer continued. "We know what you've done, but we have no quarrel with the woman. Send her out, and we'll let her go." "They're lying," Lydia whispered. "I know." Kale was scanning the area, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. They were pinned down, outnumbered, with no cover except this single boulder. "Listen to me. When I move, you run east. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just run." "No." "Lydia, I said no." She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "I spent 22 years doing what I was told, going where I was sent, being who other people wanted me to be. I'm done with that. If I die here, at least I die making my own choice." Something shifted in his eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or recognition? He opened his mouth to respond, but another volley of shots cut him off, bullets sparking off the boulder, kicking up dust. When the shooting stopped, Lydia could hear the soldiers moving closer, their boots crunching on gravel. Kale made a decision. She could see it happen, see his whole body change. He grabbed her hand and pulled her up. "When I say run, you run. Understand? Where? Just run." He stood up suddenly, bow drawn, and loosed 3 arrows in rapid succession. 2 found targets. The third missed. Then he was running, dragging Lydia behind him, and she stumbled after him as bullets tore up the ground around them. They made it maybe 30 yards before horses cut them off, soldiers wheeling in from both sides. They were trapped in the open, nowhere to hide. Cale put himself between Lydia and the soldiers, bow up, one arrow left. His breathing was hard but steady, and there was no fear in his face, just calculation. He was measuring distances, counting opponents, figuring out how many he could take before they killed him. "Stand down!" the officer shouted. He'd dismounted and was walking toward them, revolver drawn. "Last chance!" "Let her go," Cale said. "She's not part of this." "She is now. The moment she chose to run with you." The officer stopped about 20 feet away. He was younger than Lydia had expected, maybe 30, with a scar across his chin. "You're Kyle Stone Giant, wanted for the murder of 6 cavalry soldiers outside Mesa Crossing, for the ambush at Copper Ridge. I know what I'm wanted for." "Then you know we're taking you in. Dead or alive makes no difference to me." The officer's eyes flicked to Lydia. "But the woman doesn't have to die. She can walk away right now." "No, she can't," Lydia said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "You'll take her back to Brennan. Use her to collect a reward. She's worth money to you." The officer's face hardened. "Smart girl." "Yeah, Brennan's offering $500 for your return. Dead or alive also, though he'd prefer alive." He smiled without warmth. "But here's the thing. We're not bounty hunters. We're Army. We've got orders regarding him." He nodded at Kyle. "You're just a bonus." "Then let me go," Lydia said. "Take him. Let me go." "Can't do that. You've been traveling with a wanted criminal. That makes you an accomplice." "She didn't have a choice," Kyle said flatly. "I took her after the bandit attack. She's a hostage." "That true?" The officer looked at Lydia. "He forced you to come with him?" Lydia met Kyle's eyes. She could see what he was trying to do. Give her an out, a story that would let her escape this. All she had to do was lie. "Say yes, he forced me. I was terrified. Please help me." The soldiers would take Kyle away and she'd be free, alive, safe. "No," she said. "He didn't force me. I chose to go with him." Kyle's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. The officer sighed. "All right then, you're both under arrest. Drop the bow and come quietly, or we'll kill you where you stand." "How many men you willing to lose?" Kyle asked conversationally. "Because I promise you, I'll take at least 3 before you get me. Maybe 4. That's supposed to scare me? Just want you to know the price." The officer considered this. Then he raised his voice. "Matthews? Wilson. Flank left. Carson, you've got right. On my mark." Soldiers moved into position, spreading out in a loose circle. There was no way out. Cale knew it. Lydia knew it. Everyone knew it. But Cale didn't lower his bow. "Wait!" Lydia stepped forward, hands raised. "Wait. I have money. My father's wealthy. If you let us go, I can get you more than Brennan's offering. Much more." The officer laughed. "That's real sweet, miss. But we're not interested in your daddy's money. We've got orders." "Orders to do what? Kill an unarmed woman?" "Orders to bring in Kyle Stone Giant. What happens to you is your own doing." "Then you're no better than the bandits who attacked us." Lydia's voice shook with anger. "You talk about law and order, but you're just murderers with uniforms." "Lydia," Cale's voice was quiet. "Stop." "No. They should know what they're doing. They should know. They already know. They don't care." He lowered his bow slowly. "It's okay. I'm done running." "Don't!" She grabbed his arm. "Don't give up." "I'm not giving up. I'm choosing." He looked at the officer. "Let her go and I'll come quietly. No fight, no resistance. You have my word." "Your word doesn't mean much to me, Stone Giant." "It should. I've never broken it." Cale's voice was steady. "Let her walk away. Point her toward the fort. She makes it there alive, and you get me without losing any more men. That's a good deal." The officer chewed on this, clearly weighing the options. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But if she comes back, if she tries anything, the deal's off, and we shoot you both." "Understood." Kyle turned to Lydia. His face was calm, almost peaceful. "Go, now. Don't look back." "I won't leave you." "Yes, you will, because if you don't, we both die. And everything we went through, everything we survived, it'll be for nothing." He touched her face again, that same gentle gesture. You wanted a choice. This is mine. Respect it. Tears were running down Lydia's face, though she didn't remember starting to cry. This isn't fair. No, but that's how it is. He pushed her gently toward the east. Go. Be free. That's all I wanted. She stood there, frozen, unable to make her legs work. The officer made an impatient gesture, and 2 soldiers moved forward to take Kyle into custody. They bound his wrists behind his back with rough efficiency, taking his knife, his bow, everything. Miss Ashcroft, the officer said, you've got 10 seconds to start walking before I change my mind. Lydia looked at Kyle one last time. He nodded, just barely, and she saw no fear in him, only acceptance, only peace. She turned and walked east. Every step felt like tearing something inside her. She wanted to run back, to fight, to do something other than abandon him. But she kept walking because he'd asked her to, because it was the only gift she could give him now. Behind her, she heard the sounds of the soldiers mounting up, the jingle of tack, low voices discussing which route to take back to their fort. She walked until the sounds faded, walked until her legs were shaking and her vision blurred with tears, walked until the sun was directly overhead and the heat was crushing. Then she stopped and looked back. They were gone. The desert was empty except for her. Lydia sank to her knees in the dirt and screamed. It came out raw and broken, all the grief and rage and helplessness she'd been holding back. She screamed until her throat was raw, until there was nothing left inside her but emptiness. Then she stood up and walked east. The fort appeared on the horizon just before sunset, exactly where Kyle had said it would be. Adobe walls, a wooden gate, the American flag hanging limp in the still air. Lydia approached slowly, her feet dragging. She should have felt relief. Safety. Instead, she felt nothing. The sentries saw her coming and called out. Within minutes, she was surrounded by people, soldiers, civilians, someone's wife offering her water. They led her inside to a small office where a gray-haired captain sat behind a desk covered in paperwork. Miss Ashcroft, he said, standing. We've been looking for you. Mr. Brennan has been very worried. I'm sure he has. Her voice was flat. The captain frowned. Are you injured? Where's your escort? Dead. Bandits killed them 3 days ago. She recited the facts mechanically. My Aunt Margaret Holcomb was killed. The hired men were killed. I was taken hostage, then rescued, then arrested, then let go. Rescued by whom? She hesitated. A traveler. He helped me get here. This traveler have a name? No. The captain studied her face, and she could see him deciding how much to press. Finally, he sighed. Well, you're safe now. We'll send word to Mr. Brennan that you've been recovered. He can arrange transport to bring you to his ranch. I'm not going. I'm sorry? I said I'm not going. I'm not marrying him. I'm not going to his ranch. I'm not doing any of it. The captain's frown deepened. Miss Ashcroft, I understand you've been through an ordeal, but you don't understand anything. She stood up. Where's the nearest town? One with a telegraph office? Silver Springs, about 20 miles north, but you can't just, I can and I will. She walked to the door. Thank you for the water. Miss Ashcroft, wait. You can't travel alone. It's not safe. Safer than staying here. She looked back at him. Am I under arrest for something? No, but then I'm leaving. In the morning. If you try to stop me, I'll make things very difficult for everyone involved. She left before he could respond, walking out into the dusty fort grounds. Someone showed her to a barracks where she could sleep, and a woman brought her clean clothes, a simple dress that actually fit, boots that didn't have holes. Lydia washed her face and hands in a basin of cold water and looked at her reflection in a small mirror. The woman staring back at her was sunburned, gaunt, with hard eyes and a set to her mouth that hadn't been there a week ago. She looked like someone who'd survived something that should have killed her. She looked like someone who'd lost everything and was still standing. She looked like a stranger. That night, lying on a thin mattress in the barracks, Lydia stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of what had happened. 4 days ago, she'd been a prisoner being transported to a life she didn't want. 3 days ago, she'd watched everyone she knew die in a bandit attack. 2 days ago, she'd been walking through the desert with a man who barely spoke, learning how to survive. This morning, she'd watched soldiers take him away, and she'd done nothing to stop it. The shame of that burned worse than any sunburn. She'd told herself she was respecting his choice, honoring his sacrifice. But the truth was simpler and uglier. She'd been afraid. Afraid of dying. Afraid of throwing away this second chance at life he'd given her. So she'd walked away like a coward and left him to his fate. Somewhere out there, Kyle was in chains, or maybe already dead. They'd take him to some military prison and there'd be a trial, probably a short one, and then they'd hang him for crimes she didn't fully understand, but knew he'd committed in a war that had no winners. And she'd live on, safe and free, carrying the weight of that knowledge. She got out of bed. The barracks were dark and quiet, except for the breathing of other women sleeping nearby, laundresses and cooks and officers' wives who'd looked at her with pity when she'd arrived. She pulled on the borrowed dress and the boots and slipped outside. The fort was quiet, just a few sentries walking the walls. Lydia made her way to the stables, moving carefully, and found what she was looking for: horses, saddles, supplies. She picked a sturdy-looking mare that didn't shy away when she approached, and began saddling her in the dark. "You're making a mistake." Lydia spun around. A young soldier stood in the stable entrance, rifle in hand but not pointed at her. He looked about her age, with freckles and red hair. "I'm just borrowing a horse," Lydia said carefully. "I'll send payment when I can." "That's theft. They'll hang you for it." "Then they'll hang me. I don't care." The soldier studied her. "You're going after him, the Apache who brought you here." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. Captain thinks you're lying about who rescued you. Thinks maybe it was Stone Giant himself." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Was it?" Lydia didn't answer. "I'll take that as a yes." The soldier glanced over his shoulder, then back at her. "He killed my brother 2 years ago during a raid on a wagon train near Mesa Crossing." Lydia's hand tightened on the saddle. "Then I guess you're here to stop me." "I should be." He was quiet for a moment. "But my brother was a drunk and a mean son of a bitch who joined the army because he liked killing things. So I'm not going to pretend he didn't have it coming." He gestured at the horse. "That mare's strong, but she's stubborn. Take the roan gelding instead. Better temperament." "Why are you helping me?" "Because I've seen what happens to men like Stone Giant in military custody, and whatever he did, whatever he is, no one deserves that." He helped her switch saddles to the gelding. "They're taking him to Fort Prescott, northeast of here, 3 days hard ride. You'll need supplies." He disappeared and came back with a pack: food, water, a bedroll, a rifle. "You know how to shoot this?" "I can learn." He showed her the basics: how to load it, how to aim, how to make sure it didn't kick back and break her shoulder. Then he helped her mount the gelding. "You realize they'll come after you. Let them. You're crazy." "Probably." She looked down at him. "What's your name?" "Private James Cotter." "Thank you, Private Cotter. I won't forget this." "Just don't get yourself killed. Would hate to think I helped you commit suicide." He opened the stable door. "And Miss Ashcroft, if you do manage to free him, tell Stone Giant that Jimmy Cotter says his brother deserved what he got. Maybe that'll mean something." Lydia rode out of the fort, through a side gate that Cotter opened for her, into the desert night. The gelding was strong beneath her, and the stars overhead were bright enough to navigate by. She pointed the horse northeast and kicked him into a trot. She had 3 days to catch up to soldiers who had a half-day head start. 3 days to figure out how to free a prisoner from armed guards. 3 days to become someone brave enough to do what needed doing. The desert stretched out ahead of her, vast and dark and full of dangers she couldn't see. But for the first time since Margaret died, since her whole life collapsed, Lydia felt something like purpose. She wasn't running away anymore. She was running toward something, toward danger, toward trouble, toward a man who'd saved her life and then sacrificed himself to keep her alive, toward a choice that was entirely her own. The night air was cold, and the horse's hooves beat a steady rhythm on the hard ground. Lydia rode northeast, following the stars, following her gut, following the only path that made sense anymore. Behind her, the fort disappeared into darkness. Ahead, somewhere in the vast empty country, Kyle was being transported to his execution, and between here and there lay 3 days of desert, a half-dozen armed soldiers, and every reason to turn back. Lydia rode faster, By dawn, she'd covered maybe 15 miles and the gelding was starting to tire. She found a small canyon with some shade and let the horse rest, feeding him oats from the pack Cotter had given her. She ate some hardtack herself, forcing it down, though her stomach was clenched tight with nerves. She tried not to think about what she was doing. If she thought about it too much, she'd lose her nerve. Better to just keep moving, keep riding, and deal with problems as they came. The sun climbed higher and she mounted again, pushing northeast. The country was rough, broken mesas and dry washes that the horse had to pick his way through carefully. Once she saw riders in the distance and had to hide in an arroyo until they passed. Soldiers, maybe, or settlers. She couldn't tell and didn't want to find out. By the second night she was exhausted, swaying in the saddle, her legs cramping from hours of riding. She made a cold camp in a ring of rocks and slept fitfully, the rifle beside her, jumping awake at every sound. The horse grazed nearby, unconcerned. She woke before dawn and rode on. The third day was the hardest. The gelding was flagging and she was running low on water. Her face felt like leather and her hands were covered in blisters from the reins. Everything hurt. But she kept going because stopping meant giving up, and she was done with that. She spotted them just before noon, a line of riders moving across a flat plain, heading toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. Fort Prescott. Had to be. Lydia urged the gelding into a trot, then a canter, closing the distance. The soldiers heard her coming and turned, hands going to weapons. She pulled up about 50 yards away and dismounted. Her legs nearly buckled, but she forced herself to stand straight. The officer from before rode forward, the one with the scar on his chin. He looked at her with something like disbelief. "Miss Ashcroft, what the hell are you doing here?" "I came for him." She pointed at Kyle, who was riding in the middle of the group with his hands bound to the saddle horn. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Let him go." "Are you out of your mind?" "Probably, but I'm not leaving without him." The officer laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You rode 3 days through hostile country to demand we release a convicted murderer. Do I have that right?" "He's not convicted of anything yet. It's just paperwork. He's guilty, and everyone knows it. Then give him a fair trial. Let him speak in his defense. He'll get a trial in a military court. Then we'll hang him." The officer walked his horse closer. "Miss Ashcroft, I let you go as a courtesy. Don't make me regret it. I'm not asking for courtesy. I'm asking for justice." "Justice?" He laughed again, louder this time. "You want justice? How about justice for the soldiers he killed, the settlers he raided, the families he destroyed? How about justice for his people?" Lydia shot back. "For the villages burned, the children murdered, the land stolen? Or does justice only work one direction?" The officer's face darkened. "You need to turn around and ride away, right now, before I arrest you for aiding a fugitive. Go ahead. Arrest me." She took a step forward. "Put me in chains next to him. Drag us both to your court. Let's see what kind of justice you're really offering." "You stupid girl." "Captain." One of the other soldiers spoke up, an older man with sergeant stripes. "She's got a point. If we arrest her, there'll be questions. Her father's connected back east. Could cause problems." The captain looked like he wanted to hit something. "Fine. You want to throw your life away for him? That's your choice. But we're not letting him go. We've got orders and we're following them." "Then I'm coming with you." Lydia walked to the gelding and remounted. "To the fort, to the trial, all of it." "The hell you are." "You can't stop me. This is open country. I'll follow at a distance if I have to." The captain stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to his men. "Anyone shoots her, you'll answer to me. But if she interferes, if she tries anything, take her down." He looked back at Lydia. "You're making a mistake you can't come back from." "I know," Lydia said. She urged the gelding forward, falling in beside the column of soldiers. Kyle was 10 feet away, still watching her with that unreadable expression. When their eyes met, she saw something shift in his face. Not quite a smile, but close. They rode the rest of the way to Fort Prescott in silence, and when the wooden gates closed behind them, Lydia knew she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. Whatever happened next, whatever the cost, she was committed. She'd made her choice. Fort Prescott was bigger than the last one, with proper barracks and a stockade and what looked like officer quarters built from actual lumber instead of adobe. Soldiers stared as they rode through the gates, at Kyle in chains, at Lydia riding beside the column like she had every right to be there. She stared back, daring any of them to say something. They took Kyle to the stockade, a windowless building with iron bars over the door. The captain dismounted and gestured for 2 soldiers to haul Kyle off his horse. They weren't gentle about it. Kyle hit the ground hard and didn't try to get up, just knelt there in the dirt with his head down. "Inside," the captain said. They dragged him through the door, and Lydia heard the heavy sound of a bolt sliding home. She sat on the gelding, watching, her hands tight on the reins. "Miss Ashcroft." The captain walked over to her. "You need to leave. Now. Before the commanding officer asks questions, I don't want to answer." "I'm not leaving." "Then you're a fool." He lowered his voice. "Listen to me. I don't know what you think is going to happen here, but that man is going to hang. Nothing you do or say will change that. The trial's a formality. The outcome's already decided." "Then it's not a trial. It's murder. Call it what you want, but it's happening." He grabbed the gelding's bridle. "Go, while you still can. Forget about him and go live your life." Lydia looked past him at the stockade, at the closed door with its iron bars. "I can't." "Why not? What is he to you?" "I don't know." The honesty of it surprised her. "But he saved my life, and I won't abandon him." The captain studied her face, then sighed and let go of the bridle. "You've got until morning to clear out. After that, if you're still here, I'm arresting you for vagrancy." "Understood?" "Understood." He walked away, shaking his head. The other soldiers dispersed, heading to their duties, and Lydia was left alone in the middle of the fort yard. She dismounted and led the gelding to what looked like a stable, found an empty stall, and got him settled with water and feed. Then she stood there trying to figure out what the hell to do next. A woman approached, middle-aged, wearing a plain dress and an apron, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. "You the one who rode in with the prisoner?" "Yes." "You look like death. When's the last time you ate?" "I don't know. Yesterday, maybe?" The woman made a disgusted sound. "Come with me. I'm not having you collapse in my fort yard." She led Lydia to a mess hall where a few off-duty soldiers sat playing cards. They went quiet when Lydia entered, watching her with open curiosity. The woman, she introduced herself as Mrs. Talbot, the cook, brought Lydia a plate of stew and cornbread and stood there with her arms crossed until Lydia started eating. "You got a death wish?" Mrs. Talbot asked. "Why does everyone keep asking me that?" "Because you rode 3 days to get yourself mixed up with a man who's as good as dead. That's not the behavior of someone with sense." She pulled out a chair and sat down. "What's your story? You his woman?" "No, I barely know him." "Then why?" Lydia pushed the stew around with her spoon. "He saved my life multiple times. When he didn't have to, when it would have been easier to leave me. And when soldiers caught him, he made a deal to let me go free." She looked up at Mrs. Talbot. "How do I walk away from that?" "Same way you walk away from anything. You put one foot in front of the other and you keep going." "I can't." Mrs. Talbot was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What's his name?" "Cale." "And yours?" "Lydia Ashcroft." "Well, Miss Ashcroft, I'll tell you something. I've been at this fort for 8 years. I've seen a lot of men locked in that stockade. Most of them deserved it. Some didn't. But every single one of them ended up the same way, hanging from a rope while folks watched and pretended it was justice." She leaned forward. "Whatever you think you're going to do, it won't work. This fort is full of soldiers who follow orders. The commanding officer here, Colonel Baines, he's as rigid as they come. He'll convene a tribunal. They'll find your Kyle guilty, and that'll be the end of it." "When's the tribunal?" "Day after tomorrow, probably. They'll want to get it done quick." Lydia's mind was racing. 2 days. She had 2 days to figure out how to save someone who was being held in a locked building surrounded by armed soldiers. It was impossible. Completely impossible. She finished the stew anyway. Mrs. Talbot brought her coffee, real coffee, hot and strong, and Lydia drank it gratefully. "There's a room in the back," Mrs. Talbot said. "Storage mostly, but there's a cot. You can sleep there tonight, but come morning, you need to be gone. Captain Voss wasn't lying about arresting you." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm just trying to keep you from getting yourself killed over something you can't change." She stood up. "And Miss Ashcroft? Whatever happened between you and that man, it's over. Best you accept it now." But Lydia couldn't accept it. She lay on the cot in the storage room, staring at the ceiling, and her mind kept turning over possibilities. She could try to break him out, but she had no idea how to pick a lock or overpower guards. She could try to bribe someone, but she had no money. She could appeal to Colonel Baines, plead for mercy, but Mrs. Talbot had made it clear that wouldn't work. Every option led to failure. She got up before dawn and went outside. The fort was quiet, just a few sentries on the walls. She walked to the stockade and stood outside, looking at the barred door. There was a guard sitting on a stool nearby, half asleep. "You can't be here," he said when he saw her. "I know. I just want to talk to him. No visitors. Please, just 5 minutes." The guard looked her over, weighing it. Then he sighed. 5 minutes. And if anyone asks, you were never here. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. Lydia stepped inside and the door clanged shut behind her. It took her eyes a moment to adjust to the darkness. The stockade was a single room with a dirt floor and stone walls. Kyle sat in the corner, his hands still bound, his face bruised and swollen. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was rough. "Neither should you." She crossed to him and knelt down. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing that matters." "Let me see." She reached for his face, but he pulled back. "Don't." "Kyle, I said don't." His eyes were hard. "Why did you come back? I told you to go, to be free." "I was free. I didn't like it." "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." "Probably." She sat down across from him. "They're going to hang you." "I know. Day after tomorrow." "I know that too." "And you're just going to let them?" "What choice do I have?" He leaned his head back against the wall. "I've been running for 2 years. Longer than that, really. I'm tired, Lydia. Tired of hiding, tired of fighting, tired of watching my back every second. Maybe this is better." "Better? They're going to kill you." "Everyone dies. At least this way I get to choose how." He looked at her. "But you don't have to be here for it. You can still leave." "No, I can't." "Yes, you can. Just walk out that door and keep walking." "I tried that already. It didn't work." She reached out and took his bound hands. He tried to pull away, but she held on. "I left you once. I'm not doing it again." "You're going to get yourself killed." "Then I'll die. At least I'll die on my own terms." He stared at her, and something in his face shifted, the hardness cracking, something raw underneath. "Why? Why do you care what happens to me?" "Because—" She stopped, trying to find words for something she didn't fully understand herself. "Because you're the first person who ever let me choose. You didn't tell me what to do or who to be. You just walked in a direction and let me follow or not. And when you gave yourself up, you gave me something I'd never had before. Real freedom. Not the kind that's handed to you, but the kind you take." She squeezed his hands. "I can't just walk away from that. From you." Kyle was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You're insane." "I know. And stubborn." "I know that too. And you're going to die here for nothing." "Maybe. But it won't be for nothing. It'll be for a choice I made." She smiled, though tears were running down her face. "You taught me that, so blame yourself." The door opened and the guard stuck his head in. "Time's up." Lydia stood up slowly. Cale was still looking at her with that raw expression, like she'd stripped away something he'd been using as armor. She wanted to say more, to tell him everything she'd realized over the past 3 days, but the words wouldn't come. So she just touched his face once, gently, and walked out. The guard locked the door behind her. "He's a lucky man," he said quietly. "No, he's not. He's going to die." "Still lucky. Not many people get someone who cares like that." Lydia walked away before she started crying again. She went back to the mess hall where Mrs. Talbot was already working, preparing breakfast for the soldiers. The older woman took one look at Lydia's face and shook her head. "You saw him?" "Yes." "And you're still not leaving?" "No." Mrs. Talbot sighed. "Then you're a damned fool, but I admire the commitment." She handed Lydia a knife and a pile of potatoes. "If you're staying, make yourself useful." Lydia peeled potatoes while the fort woke up around her. Soldiers came in for breakfast, eyeing her with curiosity but not saying anything. Captain Voss appeared at some point, and she expected him to throw her out, but he just looked at her, shook his head, and left without a word. "He's got a soft spot," Mrs. Talbot said. "Lost a daughter a few years back. You remind him of her, probably." "Is that why he's not arresting me?" "That, and he figures you're harmless. What are you going to do, start a riot?" She stirred a pot of beans. "Though if you're going to do something stupid, now's the time. Colonel Baines arrives this afternoon to oversee the tribunal tomorrow." "What's he like?" "Like I said, rigid, by the book. He sees the world in black and white, and Apache raiders fall solidly in the black category." She glanced at Lydia. "You won't change his mind with tears or pleas. Don't even bother trying." But Lydia had to try something. After breakfast, she cleaned herself up as best she could and went to the administration building where Colonel Baines would be. A private at the door tried to turn her away, but she pushed past him and knocked hard on the colonel's door. "Enter." She went in. Colonel Baines sat behind a desk covered in military documents, his uniform crisp and perfectly pressed. He was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He looked up at her with cold eyes. "Who are you?" "Lydia Ashcroft. I need to speak to you about the prisoner, Kyle Stone Giant." "There's nothing to speak about. The tribunal convenes tomorrow at 0900. The prisoner will be tried for crimes against the United States military, and he will be found guilty." "Then it's not a trial, it's an execution. Call it what you like." He went back to his papers. "You're dismissed." "I'm not leaving. That man saved my life. He deserves a chance to defend himself." "He'll have that chance at the tribunal." "Will he? Or will you already have decided his fate?" Baines looked up slowly, his expression dangerous. "Young lady, I don't know who you think you are, but I strongly suggest you leave this office before I have you removed. I'm Lydia Ashcroft. My father is Jonathan Ashcroft of Philadelphia. He has connections in Washington, senators, congressmen, people who care about how the military conducts itself on the frontier." It was a bluff, mostly. Her father did have connections, but he'd probably disown her if he knew what she was doing. "If this tribunal is a sham, if you execute a man without a fair hearing, I will make sure everyone back east knows about it." Baines stood up slowly. He was tall, imposing. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm promising you. Give Cale a fair trial, or I'll make this the scandal of the decade. His crimes are well documented. 6 soldiers dead at Mesa Crossing, 4 more at Copper Ridge, raids on settler wagons, attacks on supply lines. Did he have a trial for any of those? Was he convicted in a court? He's a hostile combatant. He's a man. And unless the army has decided it's above the law, he deserves a proper defense." She stepped closer to the desk. "I'll defend him myself if I have to." Baines stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "You? A woman with no legal training? I can read, I can speak, I can present evidence. That's more than he'll get otherwise. The tribunal allows for defense counsel, but it must be a military officer. Then appoint me one, or let me do it." She held his stare. "Unless you're afraid that a fair trial might not give you the outcome you want." Baines's face flushed red. For a moment she thought he was going to have her dragged out. Then he sat down heavily and said, "Fine. You want to make a fool of yourself. That's your choice. But the tribunal will proceed as scheduled. 0900 tomorrow. Be there or don't. Makes no difference to me. The outcome will be the same." "We'll see." She left before he could change his mind. Outside, her hands were shaking and her heart was pounding. She'd just done something incredibly stupid. She had no idea how to defend someone in a military tribunal. She had less than 24 hours to prepare. And the man presiding over the whole thing had already decided Kyle was guilty. But at least now she had a chance. Slim, maybe impossible, but a chance. She spent the rest of the day in the fort's small library, really just a room with a few shelves of military regulations and law books. She read until her eyes burned, trying to understand how these tribunals worked, what rights the accused had, what arguments might actually matter. Most of it was dense legal language that made her head hurt, but she forced herself to keep going. Mrs. Talbot brought her dinner and sat with her while she ate. "You really going through with this?" "I don't have a choice. Everyone's got a choice. You're choosing to fight impossible odds for a man you barely know."
I know him better than you think. Do you? Mrs. Talbot's voice was gentle. Or do you know what you want him to be? Lydia didn't have an answer for that. She went back to reading, making notes on scraps of paper, building arguments in her head. When the sun went down, she lit a lamp and kept working. Sometime after midnight, she fell asleep at the table, her head on an open book. She woke to Mrs. Talbot shaking her shoulder. It's dawn. Tribunal's in 3 hours. You need to eat and clean up. Lydia did both in a daze, her mind still sorting through everything she'd read. She put on the cleanest dress she had and tried to do something with her hair. When she looked in the small mirror Mrs. Talbot provided, she barely recognized herself. Sunburned, thinner than she'd been a week ago, with eyes that looked older than 22. She looked like someone who'd survived hell. At 8:45, she walked to the building where the tribunal would be held. It was one of the fort's larger structures, usually used for officer meetings. Inside, chairs had been set up facing a long table where 3 officers sat, Colonel Baines in the middle, flanked by 2 captains she didn't recognize. Captain Voss was there too, along with a dozen soldiers who'd be serving as witnesses or observers. Kael was brought in wearing chains, his face still bruised. He saw Lydia and stopped dead. "What are you doing?" he said. "Defending you." "No, absolutely not. I don't care what you want." She guided him to a chair. "Sit down and let me help you." "Lydia, this is insane." "Yes, it is. Now be quiet." Colonel Baines banged a gavel. "This tribunal will come to order. We are here to determine the guilt or innocence of the prisoner known as Kael Stone Giant on charges of murder and assault against United States military personnel." He looked at Lydia. "Miss Ashcroft, I understand you're serving as defense counsel." "Yes, sir." "Very well. Let's proceed." The prosecution went first, Captain Voss laying out the charges in detail. 6 soldiers killed at Mesa Crossing during an ambush on a supply wagon. 4 more killed at Copper Ridge when Kael and several other Apache had raided a patrol. Multiple other attacks over a 2-year period, always targeting military personnel, always with extreme violence. "The evidence is clear," Voss said. "The defendant is a known hostile who has waged war against the United States Army. He has killed at least 10 soldiers that we can verify, likely more. He has shown no remorse and offers no defense. The tribunal should find him guilty and sentence him to death by hanging." Baines looked at Lydia. "Does the defense wish to respond?" Lydia stood up, her notes clutched in her hand. Her mouth was dry and her heart was hammering, but she forced herself to speak clearly. "The prosecution has laid out a list of actions, but they've failed to provide context. These incidents didn't occur in a vacuum. They occurred during a period when the United States Army was actively engaged in forcing Apache people from their ancestral lands, often through violence." She glanced at her notes. "Military records show that in the 2 years preceding the Mesa Crossing incident, 3 Apache villages in this region were attacked by cavalry units. 87 people were killed, most of them women and children. Their homes were burned. Their food stores were destroyed." "That's irrelevant," one of the captains said. "It's completely relevant. The defendant didn't wake up one day and decide to attack soldiers. He was responding to attacks on his people, his family, his home. That's not murder. That's self-defense. That's war." "The Apache were given opportunities to relocate peacefully to reservations," Baines said. "Were they? Or were they given ultimatums? Leave your home or be killed. How is that a choice?" Lydia was hitting her stride now, anger fueling her words. "You call him a hostile. But from his perspective, you're the hostile force. You're the invaders who came to his land, killed his people, and then called it justice when he fought back. Watch your tone, Miss Ashcroft. I'll watch my tone when you acknowledge the truth. This isn't a trial about guilt or innocence. It's a trial about which side gets to write the history. And right now, you're writing a history where defending your home makes you a criminal." The room was silent. Kael was staring at her with something like awe. Captain Voss looked uncomfortable. Baines's face was stone. "Are you finished?" Baines asked coldly. "No, sir. I'd like to call a witness." "Proceed." "I call Captain Russell Voss." Voss stood up, clearly surprised. Lydia gestured for him to sit in the witness chair. When he did, she said, "Captain Voss, you were present when the defendant was captured, correct?" "Yes." "And at that time he was traveling with me?" "Yes."
Was he forcing me to accompany him? Was I bound, threatened, held against my will? Voss hesitated. No. You claimed you chose to travel with him. I did choose because days earlier he'd saved my life. My escort had been killed by bandits. I was about to be sold, or worse. And the defendant intervened, killed the bandits, freed me, and helped me survive 3 days in the desert. She looked at the tribunal. Does that sound like the behavior of a bloodthirsty killer? Or does it sound like the behavior of a man with a conscience? One act of mercy doesn't erase 10 murders, Baines said. No. But it suggests that the defendant is capable of moral judgment, that he distinguishes between combatants and innocents. The soldiers he killed were armed, trained, and actively engaged in military operations against his people. I was an unarmed woman in danger. He helped me. Doesn't that matter? It matters very little in the face of his other crimes. Lydia felt her hope starting to crack. She was losing this, and she knew it. The tribunal had made up their minds before she ever spoke. But she pressed on anyway. Then let me ask this. What happens after you hang him? Do you think that'll be the end of it? Or will more Apaches see him as a martyr and take up arms in his name? Will his death prevent violence or perpetuate it? That's speculation, one of the captains said. It's a question you should be asking, because executing him won't bring back the soldiers he killed. It won't make the frontier safer. It'll just add one more body to a pile that's already too high. She turned to Kyle. Tell them what happened to your village. Kyle had been silent throughout the whole proceeding. Now he looked up at her, then at the tribunal. I don't want your mercy. Kyle, I said I don't want it. His voice was hard. Everything you said is true. I killed those soldiers. I'd do it again. They came to my land, killed my family, and expected me to just accept it. So yes, I fought back, and I'll keep fighting until someone kills me or there's nothing left to fight for. He stood up despite the chains. You want to hang me? Fine. Do it. But don't pretend it's justice. It's revenge, same as what I did. The room was completely silent. Baines stared at Kyle with an expression Lydia couldn't read. Then he banged his gavel. We'll recess for 1 hour while the tribunal deliberates. Guards, return the prisoner to the stockade. They dragged Kyle out. He didn't resist, didn't look back. Lydia stood there feeling numb. She'd done everything she could and it hadn't been enough. Kyle had just confessed, just condemned himself, and there was nothing she could do about it. Mrs. Talbot appeared beside her. Come on, you need air. They walked outside into the bright morning. Lydia sat on a bench and put her head in her hands. I failed. You tried. That's more than most people would do. It's not enough. No, but it's what you had. Mrs. Talbot sat beside her. He's not going to let you save him, you know. He's made his peace with dying. Then he's a fool. Maybe. Or maybe he's just tired of running. She patted Lydia's shoulder. You did good in there. You spoke truth to power. That takes courage. Courage doesn't matter if it doesn't change anything. They sat in silence until the hour was up. Then Lydia forced herself to stand and walk back inside. The tribunal was reconvening, the officers taking their seats. Kyle was brought back in and placed in the chair. His face was blank, resigned. Colonel Baines stood up. This tribunal has reached a verdict. The defendant, Kyle Stone Giant, has been found guilty of murder and assault against United States military personnel. He is hereby sentenced to death by hanging, to be carried out at dawn tomorrow. He banged the gavel. This proceeding is concluded. Lydia felt something break inside her. She'd known it was coming, had expected it, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Kyle would be dead by tomorrow morning, and there was nothing she could do. Guards moved to take Kyle back to the stockade. As they passed Lydia, he stopped and looked at her. Thank you, he said quietly, for trying. It wasn't enough. It was more than I deserved. He smiled just slightly. Be free, Lydia. That's all I ask. Then they took him away, and Lydia was left standing in the empty room, feeling like everything had been hollowed out of her. She walked out in a daze, barely seeing where she was going, and ended up at the fort wall. She climbed the ladder to the rampart and stood looking out at the desert, stretching endlessly in every direction. Captain Voss found her there an hour later. Miss Ashcroft? She didn't turn around. Come to gloat? No, I came to tell you something. He leaned against the wall beside her. What you did in there, that took guts. I don't agree with your arguments, but I respect them.
Your respect doesn't save his life. No, nothing will, but he paused. Between you and me, you made some of the officers uncomfortable, got them thinking about things they'd rather not think about. That's something. It's nothing if he still hangs. Voss was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the hanging's scheduled for dawn, but guards change shift at 0400. There's about 15 minutes where coverage is thin.
Someone who knew what they were doing could cause a distraction. Maybe slip into the stockade while everyone's occupied. Lydia turned to look at him. What are you saying? I'm saying it would be a shame if the prisoner escaped during the night. Really embarrassing for fort security. But these things happen. He met her eyes. Especially when someone leaves a door unlocked and a horse saddled outside the north wall. Why would you help us? Because maybe you're right. Maybe this is just revenge, and maybe I'm tired of it. He straightened up. I never had this conversation with you, and if you try anything stupid and get yourself killed, I'll deny everything. He walked away before she could respond. Lydia stood there, her mind racing. This was insane. This was suicide. Breaking a prisoner out of a military fort was treason. She'd be hunted, probably killed. Everything she'd been running from, everything she'd tried to escape, would be gone forever. There'd be no going back to Philadelphia, no reconciling with her father, no life of safety and comfort, but there'd be freedom, real freedom, the kind that came from choosing your own path even when it led into darkness. She waited until 0400. The fort was quiet, most soldiers asleep. She made her way to the stockade as quietly as she could. The guard who'd been there earlier was gone, replaced by a younger soldier who looked half asleep. And the door, she tried it gently. The door was unlocked, just like Voss had said. She slipped inside. Kyle was sitting in the same corner, eyes closed. She crossed to him and shook his shoulder. Wake up. His eyes snapped open. Lydia, what? We're leaving, right now. She pulled out the knife she'd taken from the mess hall and started sawing at the ropes binding his wrists. You can't do this. They'll kill you. Then they'll have to catch us first. The ropes parted and Kyle's hands came free. She grabbed his arm and pulled him to his feet. There's a horse outside the north wall. Can you ride? Yes, but no buts. We're going, now. They moved to the door. The guard outside was still at his post but facing away. Lydia pulled Kyle in the opposite direction, toward a gap in the stockade's back wall that she'd noticed earlier. It was tight, barely wide enough to squeeze through, but they managed. Then they were running, staying low, heading for the north wall. An alarm bell started ringing. Someone had noticed. Shouts erupted behind them and Lydia heard boots pounding on dirt. They reached the wall and scrambled up a ladder that someone, Voss probably, had left in place. At the top, Lydia could see the horse waiting below, just like promised. Jump, she shouted. They jumped. Lydia hit the ground hard, rolled, and came up running. Kyle was right behind her. They reached the horse and Kyle swung into the saddle, pulling Lydia up behind him. Then they were riding, the horse's hooves throwing up dust, the fort falling away behind them. Gunshots cracked through the air, but they were already out of range. Kyle kicked the horse into a full gallop, and they raced into the desert darkness, chasing the horizon, running toward nothing and everything at once. Lydia wrapped her arms around Kyle's waist and held on tight. The wind tore at her hair and her heart was pounding, and she felt more alive than she'd ever felt in her entire life. Behind them, the fort's lights were fading. Ahead was only darkness and possibility. Where are we going? She shouted over the wind. I don't know, Kyle shouted back. Wherever we can. They'll come after us. I know. We might not make it. I know that too. He looked back at her, and even in the darkness she could see him smile. But we'll die free. That's something. It was everything. They rode through the night, putting miles between themselves and the fort, and when the sun started to rise, they were deep in canyon country where an army could search for years and never find them. Kyle finally slowed the horse, and they dismounted in a hidden canyon with a spring trickling from the rocks. We need to keep moving, Kyle said. They'll track us. Let them try. Lydia was grinning despite everything. We've got a head start. A few hours. That's all. Then we make them count. She walked to the spring and drank, then splashed water on her face. When she turned around, Kyle was watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. Something open, vulnerable. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Why risk everything?" "Because you gave me a choice," she said simply. "And I chose this. I chose you." He crossed to her and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and Lydia felt something settle in her chest. This wasn't the ending she'd imagined a week ago. It wasn't safe or comfortable or anything like the life she'd been promised. But it was hers. Completely, absolutely hers. They had maybe hours before soldiers found them. Maybe days if they were lucky. But right now, standing in this hidden canyon with the sun rising overhead and the whole desert spread out before them, Lydia felt something she'd never felt before. She felt free. They had 3 days before the soldiers caught up to them. 3 days of riding through canyons so narrow the horse had to move sideways, of sleeping in caves with one eye open, of rationing water and hardtack that tasted like cardboard. 3 days of Kyle teaching Lydia how to move quietly, how to read tracks in dust, how to know when you were being followed by the way birds fell silent. 3 days of learning what it meant to live on the edge of survival, where every choice mattered and mistakes got you killed. On the morning of the 4th day, they woke to find hoofprints circling their camp. The soldiers had found them during the night and left without attacking. A message. "We know where you are. We're just deciding when to take you." "They're playing with us," Kyle said, studying the tracks. His face was grim. "Letting us run until we're too tired to fight back." "How many?" 8, maybe 10. He stood up and scanned the canyon walls. "They've got us boxed in. East and west are blocked. We go north, we run straight into them. South is open, but it leads to alkali flats. No water, no cover. We'd die out there before they had to lift a finger." "So what do we do?" Cale was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I lead them away. You go south. There's a settlement called Hackberry, about 40 miles past the flats. If you can make it there—" "No!" Lydia cut him off. "We're not doing that again. I didn't break you out of that fort just to watch you sacrifice yourself." "Then what's your plan?" "Because I'm out of ideas." "We fight. There's 2 of us and 10 of them. Then we make the odds better." She grabbed the rifle Voss had left with the horse. "You said this canyon boxes us in. That means they have to come through narrow passages to get to us. We can defend those." "For how long? An hour? 2? Eventually they'll overrun us or we'll run out of ammunition. So we buy time. Maybe someone from the fort will have second thoughts. Maybe they'll make a mistake." She met his eyes. "Or maybe we just make them pay for every inch, but we do it together." Cale stared at her, and slowly his expression changed. Not quite a smile, but something close. "You're insane. You keep saying that, because it keeps being true." He took the rifle from her hands and checked the ammunition. "All right, if we're doing this, we do it smart. There's a narrow passage about 200 yards north, barely wide enough for a horse. We make our stand there, force them to come at us single file." They moved quickly, gathering what supplies they had, preparing for what was probably their last fight. Lydia's hands were shaking, but she forced them steady. She'd come too far, given up too much, to fall apart now. The passage Kyle had mentioned was even narrower than he'd described. A crack in the canyon wall where 2 rock faces pressed so close together you could touch both sides at once. Perfect for defense. Suicide for anyone trying to push through. They set up behind a tumble of boulders that provided cover and a clear view of the passage entrance. Kyle positioned himself on the left with his bow. Lydia took the right with the rifle, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. "When they come," Cale said quietly, "aim for the horses first. A man on foot is slower, easier to hit, and Lydia—" He looked at her. "If it goes wrong, if they break through, you run. Don't argue, don't hesitate, just run. I won't leave you." "You might have to." "Then I'll make that choice when it comes, not before." He opened his mouth to argue, but the sound of approaching horses cut him off. They were coming. Lydia pressed herself against the rock and tried to remember everything Cale had taught her about breathing, about aiming, about not jerking the trigger. The first rider appeared at the passage entrance, a young soldier with nervous eyes. He saw the defensive position and pulled up short, calling back to the others. More soldiers appeared behind him, spreading out, assessing the situation. Then Captain Voss rode forward. Of course it was him. He looked at Lydia and Kyle behind their barricade, and his face was unreadable. "Miss Ashcroft," he called out, "you've made this very difficult." "That was the idea," Lydia shouted back. "Colonel Baines wants you both alive. Surrender now and you'll get fair treatment." "We had a tribunal. That was your fair treatment. What you had was a chance. You threw it away." Voss glanced at his men, then back at Lydia. "This doesn't have to end badly. Just put down your weapons and come out." "So you can hang us both? No thanks." "Then you leave me no choice." He raised his hand and his men started dismounting, taking up positions. "We're coming through. You can surrender or you can die, but either way this ends today." "Then come on," Lydia shouted, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. "Let's see what your fair treatment looks like." Voss's face hardened. He gave an order and soldiers started moving toward the passage, using rocks for cover, rifles ready. Cale loosed an arrow and the lead soldier went down, screaming. The others scattered, returning fire, bullets sparking off stone. Lydia aimed at a soldier trying to flank them and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard into her shoulder and the shot went wild, missing completely. She worked the bolt, aimed again, fired. This time the soldier dove for cover and stayed down. The fight devolved into chaos. Soldiers would advance a few yards, then retreat when arrows or bullets drove them back. Kyle was terrifyingly efficient, his arrows finding targets with mechanical precision. But there were too many soldiers and too few arrows. Lydia fired until her shoulder was bruised and her ears were ringing, and still they kept coming. A bullet hit the rock inches from her head, showering her with stone fragments. Another grazed Kyle's arm, drawing blood. They were running out of time and ammunition both. Lydia could see it in Kyle's face, the calculation, the acceptance. He was preparing for the end. Then something changed. The soldiers stopped advancing. There was shouting, confusion. Voss was yelling orders, but his men weren't listening. They were looking at something behind Lydia and Kyle, their faces confused and frightened. Lydia risked a glance back and her breath caught. More riders were approaching from the south, at least a dozen of them, moving fast. Not soldiers. Apache warriors, faces painted, weapons ready. At their head rode an older man with gray in his hair and a scar that split his face from temple to jaw. Kyle made a sound, half gasp, half sob. Neshoba. The Apache riders swept past Lydia and Kyle's position and hit the soldiers like a hammer. What had been a siege turned into a slaughter in seconds. Voss tried to rally his men, but they broke and ran, scrambling for their horses. The Apache pursued, cutting them down, and within minutes it was over. Silence fell over the canyon, broken only by the groans of wounded men and the nervous stamping of horses. The older Apache warrior, Neshoba, dismounted and walked toward Kyle, his expression unreadable. Kyle stood up slowly, like he was seeing a ghost. "I thought you were dead." "I thought the same of you." Neshoba looked him over, taking in the chains marks on his wrists, the bruises, the exhaustion. "You look terrible." "I've had a rough week." Kyle's voice was thick. "How did you find us?" "Word travels. We heard the army caught you, that they were going to hang you. Then we heard someone broke you out." Neshoba's eyes moved to Lydia. "This the white woman who stood with you in their court?" "Yes. This is Lydia." Neshoba studied her for a long moment. Lydia forced herself to stand still under his scrutiny, not backing down, not looking away. Finally he nodded, just barely. "You have courage. Foolish courage, but courage." He looked back at Kyle. "She's why you're still alive." "Yes." "Then I owe her a debt." Neshoba turned to his warriors and gave orders in Apache. They moved to check the fallen soldiers, gathering weapons and horses. He looked back at Kyle. "Come. We need to leave before more army comes." "Where?" "North, into the deep canyons. There are places they won't follow." He paused. "Places we've kept hidden, for people like you who refuse to surrender." "People like me?" "The ones who'd rather die free than live in chains." Neshoba's voice was quiet. "There aren't many of us left. But we're still here. Still fighting, if you want." Kyle looked at Lydia. She saw the question in his eyes, the uncertainty. This was his world, his people. She was an outsider who'd stumbled into something she barely understood, He was offering her a choice: come with him into hiding, into a life of running and fighting and never being safe, or leave while she still could. I'm coming with you, she said before he could ask. You don't know what you're choosing. Yes, I do. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing this. She gestured at the canyon, at the warriors, at everything. I'm done with the world I came from. It never fit right anyway. Cale's expression softened. It won't be easy. We'll be hunted forever. I know. You'll never go back to Philadelphia, never see your family again. Good. They stopped being my family when they tried to sell me like property. She took his hand. This is my family now, if you'll have me. Neshoba made a sound that might have been approval. She's got fire. You could do worse. He mounted his horse. We ride now. Talk later. They rode north for 2 days, following trails that only Neshoba and his warriors knew. They crossed rivers by hidden fords, climbed cliff faces using ropes and handholds carved generations ago, moved through country so broken and wild that Lydia understood why the army had never found these people. This wasn't land you could conquer. You could only survive it if it allowed you to. They reached the hidden camp on the evening of the second day, a box canyon with high walls and a single narrow entrance that could be defended by 2 men. Inside, there were maybe 30 people, men, women, children, all of them looking worn and wary but not defeated. They'd carved out lives here in the margins, in the spaces the army didn't care about. An old woman approached as they dismounted. She looked at Kyle and her face crumpled. Stone giant! They said you were dead. Almost was, grandmother. Kyle embraced her gently. But I'm stubborn. You always were. She pulled back and looked at Lydia. Who's this? Lydia. She saved my life. Did she now? The old woman studied Lydia with shrewd eyes. You're a long way from home, girl. I don't have a home anymore. Everyone has a home. Question is whether you can recognize it when you find it. She turned to Neshoba. They can't stay long. Army will come looking. I know. Neshoba was already organizing sentries, posting guards. We'll move camp in a few days, go deeper. We've gone as deep as we can go. Any further and we'll starve. Then we'll starve free. The old woman shook her head but didn't argue. She led Lydia and Kyle to a small shelter made of branches and canvas and told them to rest. Lydia collapsed onto a pile of blankets, every muscle in her body screaming. Kale sat beside her, equally exhausted. You can still leave, he said quietly. Neshoba would give you a horse, supplies, get you to a settlement. Why do you keep trying to get rid of me? Because I love you. He said it simply, like it was obvious. And I don't want to watch you die in some raid or starve in some canyon because you chose me over safety. Lydia sat up and looked at him. You love me? Yes. Since when? Since you spit in that bandit's face, maybe before. He touched her cheek. You're brave and stubborn and completely insane. How could I not love you? She kissed him then, hard and fierce, pouring everything she felt into it. The fear and the hope and the desperate certainty that this was right, that choosing him was the only choice that mattered. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I love you too, she said, and I'm not leaving, ever, so stop asking. You're impossible. I learned from the best. They stayed in the hidden camp for 2 weeks. Lydia learned to hunt, to track, to move silently through the canyon. She learned the language, slowly, stumbling over words while children laughed at her accent. She learned to cook over an open fire, to tan hides, to make arrowheads from flint. She learned what it meant to live with nothing and find it was enough. And she learned about Kyle, who he'd been before the war, before the running. The stories came out slowly, usually at night around the fire. He'd had a wife once and a daughter, both killed in an army raid on their village. He'd watched them die and then he'd become something else, something hard and dangerous and focused entirely on making the army pay for what they'd taken. I was so angry, he told her one night, for so long. The anger kept me alive, but it also kept me from living, just surviving, never more than that. And now? Now I'm still angry, but there's something else too, something that feels like hope. He looked at her. You did that. You gave me a reason to want more than revenge. I didn't do anything. You were already capable of hope. You just needed permission to feel it. Maybe. He was quiet for a moment. I'm glad you're here, even if it's selfish. It's not selfish, it's human. She leaned against him. We're allowed to want things, even things we don't deserve. The army came 3 weeks later. They attacked at dawn, swarming the canyon entrance with twice as many men as before. Someone had talked, given up the location, or maybe they'd just gotten lucky. Either way, the result was the same. The camp was under siege and there was no way out except through the soldiers. Neshoba organized the defense with grim efficiency. Women and children were sent to the back of the canyon where there was a steep trail leading up and out. The warriors prepared to hold the entrance as long as possible, to buy time for the others to escape. Kael grabbed a bow and joined them. Lydia picked up the rifle she'd kept and followed. No, Kael said. You go with the others. Get out. We're past that argument. She checked the rifle's ammunition. I stay with you. That's not negotiable. He looked like he wanted to argue, but there was no time. Soldiers were already pushing into the canyon, using shields to block arrows, advancing slowly but steadily. The Apache warriors fought back with everything they had, but they were outnumbered 3-1. Lydia fired until the rifle was empty, then picked up a fallen warrior's bow and kept shooting. She wasn't as accurate as Kael, but she didn't need to be. The soldiers were packed so tightly that missing was almost impossible. Beside her, Kael moved like a machine, arrows flying, each one finding a target. But it wasn't enough. The soldiers reached the barricade and broke through, and suddenly it was hand-to-hand fighting, brutal and desperate. Kael dropped his bow and pulled a knife, moving with a speed and precision that was terrifying to watch. Lydia swung the empty rifle like a club, connecting with the soldier's head, and he went down hard. Then something hit her from behind and she fell, the breath knocked out of her lungs. She rolled over to find a soldier standing above her, bayonet raised. She didn't have time to move, to think, to do anything except watch the blade come down. Kael hit the soldier from the side, driving him into the canyon wall. The bayonet clattered away and Kael's knife flashed once, twice. The soldier fell and didn't move. Get up! Kael hauled Lydia to her feet. We need to fall back! They retreated deeper into the canyon with the other warriors, fighting every step. But there were too many soldiers and not enough warriors, and Lydia could see the end approaching like a train wreck in slow motion. They were going to lose. The camp was going to be overrun. Everyone here was going to die. Then Neshoba shouted something in Apache, and suddenly the warriors were running, not away from the soldiers, but toward the back trail where the women and children had gone. A retreat. A last desperate attempt to escape. Kael grabbed Lydia's hand and pulled her along. They ran up the steep trail, hands scrambling for purchase on rock, feet sliding on loose gravel. Behind them, soldiers were climbing too, shouting, firing shots that echoed off canyon walls. They reached the top and kept running. The trail led across a high plateau and then down into another canyon system, a maze of passages where they might lose the pursuit, might survive a little longer. But Kael was slowing down. Lydia saw blood on his shirt, spreading dark across the fabric. He'd been hit during the fight and hadn't said anything. Kael, keep going, he gasped. Don't stop. You're hurt. I know. Keep going. They ran until they couldn't run anymore, until Kael stumbled and fell to his knees. Lydia knelt beside him and pulled his shirt aside. The wound was bad, a bullet hole in his side bleeding freely. She pressed her hands against it, trying to stop the blood, but it just kept coming. No, she said. No, you don't get to die. Not now. Not after everything. Lydia. His voice was weak. Listen to me. No, shut up and let me fix this. Oh, you can't fix it. He caught her hands. It's done. I'm done. You're not. We'll find help. There is no help. He pulled her down so their foreheads were touching. It's okay. This is better than I deserved. Don't say that. It's true. I've done terrible things. Killed people who didn't deserve it. Hurt people who were just trying to survive, same as me. His breathing was labored. But you made me remember what it felt like to be human, to care about something other than revenge. That's more than most people get. Tears were streaming down Lydia's face. I can't do this without you. Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I've ever met. He touched her face. Promise me something. Anything. Don't go back. Don't return to that world that tried to break you. Stay out here. Stay free. He coughed and blood flecked his lips. Live the life I couldn't, for both of us. Kale, promise me. I promise. Well, the words were torn out of her. I promise. He smiled. It was weak, but genuine. Good. That's good. His eyes were starting to glaze. Thank you, Lydia, for seeing me, for choosing me, for everything. I love you. I know, I love you too. His hand fell away from her face. Be free. Then he was gone. Just like that. One moment alive, the next just an empty shell. Lydia held him and screamed, the sound echoing off canyon walls, carrying all her grief and rage into the uncaring sky. She didn't know how long she sat there. Long enough that the sun moved, long enough that the blood dried on her hands, long enough that when she heard footsteps approaching, she didn't care anymore. Let them come. Let them kill her. At least she'd be with Kyle. But it was Neshoba who appeared, blood on his clothes, exhaustion in every line of his face. He looked at Kyle's body and closed his eyes. He fought well. He's dead. Lydia's voice was flat. That's all that matters. No, how he died matters. Why he died matters. Neshoba knelt beside them. He died protecting what he loved. That's the best death a warrior can ask for. I don't care about warrior deaths or honor or any of it. I just want him back. I know. Neshoba put a hand on her shoulder. But he's gone. And you're still here. That means something. What? What does it mean? It means you keep his promise. You stay free. You live the life he wanted for you. Neshoba stood up. The others got away. Most of them. We're regrouping 10 miles north. Come with us. I don't... Lydia looked at Kyle's face, peaceful now in death. I don't know if I can. You can. Because he asked you to. Neshoba's voice was gentle but firm. Honor him by living. That's all he wanted. Lydia wanted to refuse, wanted to just lie down beside Kyle and let the desert take her. But she'd made a promise. And if there was one thing she'd learned in the past few weeks, it was that promises mattered, especially the ones made to the dying. She stood up slowly. Help me bury him. They dug a grave in the red earth, deep enough that animals wouldn't disturb it. Lydia wrapped Kyle in his blanket and they lowered him in carefully. She stood at the edge looking down at him and tried to find words for what she felt. But there were no words big enough, no language that could capture it. So she just said, "Thank you for everything. I'll keep my promise." Then they covered him with earth and stone, building a cairn that would last. Neshoba said words in Apache that Lydia didn't understand but felt in her bones. Then they walked away, leaving Kyle to rest in the land he'd fought so hard to protect. The survivors had made camp in a hidden valley with water and game. Maybe 15 people left from the original 30. Lydia moved among them like a ghost, helping where she could, but feeling hollowed out inside. The old woman, her name was Adsila, took her under wing, teaching her more of the language, more of the skills she'd need to survive. You'll heal, Adsila said one night. Not completely, some wounds never close. But you'll heal enough to keep living. I don't want to heal, I want him back. We all want that. For someone. But wanting doesn't change what is. She stirred the fire. You know what I think? I think he gave you a gift. Not just his life, but his freedom. He showed you that you could choose your own path. That's rare. Most people never learn that. What good is freedom if I'm alone? You're not alone. You're here, with us. Part of this family now. Adsila looked at her. Unless you plan to leave? Lydia thought about that. She could leave. Find a settlement, send a telegram to her father, go back to Philadelphia, explain what had happened, beg forgiveness, slip back into the life she'd been destined for. She'd be safe, comfortable, trapped. No, she said. I'm staying. Good. We need people with your fire. The seasons turned. Summer faded into fall, fall into winter. The group moved constantly, always one step ahead of army patrols, always searching for places they could survive another week, another month. It was hard and dangerous, and Lydia lost count of the close calls, the narrow escapes,
the night sleeping with weapons close at hand. But she also found something she'd never had before, a sense of purpose, of belonging.
These people didn't care about her family name or her father's money. They cared whether she could shoot straight, whether she could keep up on a march, whether she'd stand beside them when trouble came. And she could. She did. She became known among them as the White Ghost, the woman who'd walked away from her own world to live in theirs. Some found it inspiring, others found it suspicious, but all of them respected her because she'd earned it through sweat and blood and stubbornness. Years passed. 2, then 3, then 5. The army eventually stopped hunting them so intensely. There were always new threats, new wars to fight. The survivors built new lives in the margins, learning to be invisible, learning to take what they needed without drawing attention. Lydia never went back to Philadelphia, never contacted her father.
As far as he knew, she died in the desert 5 years ago. Maybe he grieved, maybe he just moved on. She didn't care anymore.
That life belonged to someone else, someone she barely remembered. She visited Kael's grave once a year, on the anniversary of his death. She'd sit by the cairn and tell him about what she'd seen, what she'd done, about the children in the camp who were growing up free, about Neshoba getting older but refusing to slow down, about Adsila's laugh, which still came easily despite everything, about her own life, which continued in ways that surprised her. She never remarried, never wanted to. What she'd had with Kael had been brief and fierce and complete. Trying to replace it would have felt like betrayal. But she wasn't alone. She had family, purpose, a life that was entirely her own. On the 10th anniversary of the day they met, Lydia made the journey to his grave one last time. She was 32 now, worn down by years of hard living, but stronger than she'd ever been in her old life. Her hands were calloused, her face lined from sun and wind. She looked nothing like the girl who'd stepped off that wagon a decade ago. She sat by the cairn and watched the sun set over the canyon country. The rocks glowed red and gold, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried. It was beautiful, harsh and unforgiving, but beautiful. I kept my promise, she said to the stones. I stayed free. I stayed out here. And you know what? You were right. This life, it's hard and it's dangerous and there's never enough of anything. But it's mine, completely mine. I wake up every day and choose it again, and that choice matters. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and dust. I miss you, she continued. Every day. But I'm not sorry for the choice I made. Not sorry I followed you into the desert. Not sorry I broke you out of that fort. Not sorry for any of it. She touched the stones. You gave me freedom. I gave you peace. That's a fair trade. She stood up slowly, her knees protesting. She wasn't young anymore, and this life aged you fast. But she was alive. Truly alive in a way she'd never been in Philadelphia, surrounded by silk and servants and rules. I won't be back for a while, she said. Maybe ever. The camp's moving farther north, into country where the army won't follow. It's a 3-month journey, and I'm getting too old to make it twice a year. She smiled. But you'll always be here, in these rocks, in this land, and I'll carry you with me wherever I go. She walked away without looking back. That part of her life was over. The grief would never leave completely. She'd carry it forever like a scar, but it no longer defined her. She was more than her loss. She was more than her love. She was Lydia Ashcroft, who'd walked away from everything to claim a freedom no one could give her. She was the white ghost of the canyon. The woman who chose wild over safe, hard over comfortable, truth over lies. And she was free. The years continued to pass. Lydia grew older, her hair turning gray, her body accumulating the aches and pains of a life lived hard. But she never softened, never compromised, never returned to the world that had tried to break her. She became a legend among the scattered Apache bands, the white woman who'd loved one of their warriors so much she'd given up everything to be with him, who'd stayed even after he died. They told stories about her around fires, teaching their children about the power of choice, about the meaning of freedom. When she was 45, sitting around a fire with Adsilela and some of the younger warriors, one of them asked her if she regretted her choice. Every day, she said honestly, and never, both at the same time. How can it be both? The young man asked. Because life's complicated, because the things worth having always cost something. She poked at the fire with a stick. I gave up safety, comfort, a life that would have been easy, but I got to choose my own path. I got to love someone completely, even if it was brief. I got to know who I really was, underneath all the expectations and rules. She looked at the young warrior. Would I change it if I could? Go back and make different choices? Maybe save Kyle somehow? Keep him alive? Would you? No, because then I wouldn't be me. I'd be some other person, living some other life. And I like who I am. Finally, she smiled. That's what Kyle gave me. Not safety or happiness. Those things come and go. He gave me myself, whole and real and mine. That's worth everything I gave up. The young warrior nodded slowly, not quite understanding but recognizing the truth when he heard it. Lydia lived to be 53 years old. She died not in some dramatic battle or tragic accident, but quietly, in her sleep, in a camp in the deep canyons where the army never came. Adsila found her in the morning, peaceful and still, wrapped in the same blanket Kyle had been buried in all those years ago. They buried her beside him in the red earth under the endless sky, built her cairn stone by stone, each person adding a piece. And when they were done, Neshoba spoke words over the graves, about courage, about love, about the price of freedom and the people who paid it willingly. In the years that followed, the story of Lydia and Kale became legend. The Apache told it to their children, who told it to theirs. The white ghost who loved a warrior, the man who died protecting what mattered. The choice they made together, to be free or die trying. Other versions of this story spread too, carried by traders and soldiers, changing in the telling. Some said Lydia had been a princess fleeing a cruel king. Others said Kyle had been a peaceful man driven to violence by injustice. The details shifted and blurred until it was hard to say where truth ended and story began. But at the heart of every version was the same truth. Two people from different worlds who chose each other when the easier choice would have been to walk away, who fought for a freedom that no one could give them, who died rather than live in chains. And in that high canyon where their bones rested, the stones that marked their graves stood for decades. Through storms and seasons, through summer heat and winter snow, the cairns endured. A testament not to tragic love or noble sacrifice, but to something simpler and more profound. To the human need to choose, to the power of that choice, even when it leads into darkness. To the courage it takes to walk away from everything safe and claim something true. The desert remembered them. The rocks held their story. And anyone who passed through that place could feel it. The echo of two souls who'd refused to be anything other than free. That was worth something. That was worth everything. In the end, we're all just stories. The question is whether we let others write ours, or whether we grab the pen and do it ourselves, messy and imperfect and entirely our own. Lydia and Kale had grabbed the pen. They'd written their story in blood and stone and red desert earth, and it was a good story. Hard and painful and cut short too soon, but good, real, true. The kind of story that reminds us why freedom matters, why choice matters, why sometimes the only way to live is to risk everything, knowing you might lose it all. Because in the losing, in the choosing, in the refusing to be anything other than yourself, that's where life actually happens. Not in the safety and comfort, but in the moments when you step off the cliff and hope the wings you've been building will hold. Lydia's wings had held, Kael's wings had held, right up until the moment they didn't, but they'd flown, and that was enough.